childhood up, we have had to conform to a certain social game. And so we're in a constant state of competition. This is the secret. You can't make a mistake.
Welcome, everybody, to Friends of Failure. I'm your host, Sam, and this is my co-host, Megan.
Heyo.
I'd like to introduce everyone to Rachel Tapscott. How you doing?
Good. I'm so excited to be here with you guys. So let's talk all about how great failure is today. I'm really excited.
Yeah. And you're talking to us from the future, right? It's a Monday morning for you, and it's Sunday, I guess, afternoon for us. So how's Monday so far? Is it pretty good?
So far, pretty good. You know, it's pretty early here. The sun is not even up. But so far, it's kicked off to be a really nice Monday.
Nice. Hopefully we'll provide some Monday motivation for you, right? I'm really glad you're here. I guess this morning, right? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So I work mainly in the area of video, so in like video production, as well as, especially in the last 2 years, just moving in towards helping people who are really nervous around getting on video, how to implement that in their business and how to get over those nerves and really just do the thing. You know, I talk to a lot of people who just want to do video and are too scared to kind of just take the leap. And I've definitely been there myself, you know, putting myself on video for the first time to try and I need to know what this feels like when I'm putting all my clients in front of the camera. So jumped on YouTube a couple of years ago. But yeah, it's just really all about helping people in any way that I can with video, making it easy for them, and also the physical making of it to help them put it in their business. So yeah, that's what I'm all about.
That's awesome. How long have you been doing that? You said a couple of years?
Yeah, so I've been in the video industry for, you know, probably 8 years now.
Okay.
But I've had, my business has been developing probably over the last 6 years. And then the last, 2, 3, probably just before COVID, I really felt like a grow in my business. And then it all kind of got flipped on its head. Yeah. But, it's really just been ever moving beast for the last few years.
Yeah, I feel that. It's funny, as you were saying that, I have no problem being on video when I'm not doing it on purpose. Like if I'm not thinking about it and I'm on video, great. As soon as someone's like, all right, we're going to record this and this is what I need you to do, it's like stage fright, I guess is the best way to explain it. I just lock up. I can't think, I can't speak. I'm literally Ricky Bobby going like, I don't know what to do with my hands, right? So I mean, that's a great thing that people can reach out to you and you can help them with that, because I'm probably one of those people.
We both are. Yeah. Like ironically, this podcast goes on YouTube, but I remember at the beginning, we were both like, like not super comfortable with it. And then like having a social media presence too, just being comfortable with like, I'm going to post another video of us doing stuff. And it's hard. It's like a little bit self-confidence. And then also just once you put it out there, it's out there. And I'm sure that's like a barrier you have to help people kind of get over.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. It's terrifying. Like, the first time, and I'm sitting here going, oh yeah, like I help people talk video every day. How hard could it be, right? And so one of my friends who's a photographer, she was like, oh, well, you should get on video yourself. You should talk about this blog post that you wrote that is about overcoming fear of the camera. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And I sat in front of the camera and I was like, oh my gosh, like, what do I say? Like, I was just completely blank. And I was like, damn, okay. So this is what I put my clients through every time. And I'm like, yeah, just talk about your business, easy peasy. So yeah, it's like getting over all these things, like building it up in my head so much. And it was like, all right, just get the words out. And I procrastinated for ages, even editing this video, and then procrastinated more on posting it because I'd worked it up so much. And then I posted it. I was like, oh, well, I mean, that wasn't that bad. The world didn't end. And then, I had all these people going, oh, like, it's so great to see you on camera. And I'm thinking, yeah, that did not go the way I thought it was going to go in my head. But yeah, it's just, and once you do it for the first time, I think it becomes a lot easier the times
yeah.
after that. It's almost like you just gotta rip the Band-Aid off.
Yeah.
And that's most often like the first piece of advice. People go, well, how do I get over, you know, my nerves and my fear? I'm like, well, you just gotta jump in and do it. And yeah, whether it's like something really easy, like just get on Instagram and film a story, something that it's not like this massive production and you're putting all this like stress and concern into it. Rip the Band-Aid off, something small, and it'll start to get you there.
We live in a world now where I think part of a lot of fear comes from the what if. And one thing I've been really trying to work on, I guess in the last like year, is being mindful of living right now. I'm not saying don't plan for your future and have like some kind of roadmap of where you want to go, right? But also it's the same thing of you can reflect on the past, but you don't have to try to live in the past. And you know, where we see these people go viral, and sometimes it's like a cute puppy story and everyone's like, this is great. But then sometimes it's like a really embarrassing moment and you're like, the entire world saw that. So one thing that changed for me, and I think Megan would agree, is that you can watch some of our original episodes, like first episodes, and I'm just like rigid. I mean, I'm like, don't
we
move.
both are like in different ways.
You don't want people to see you breathe, like, you know, just don't move. And then now, and I mean, even the way that we would talk, you could tell the nervousness and all. I mean, even posting it would create like an adrenaline rush because it was like, oh, these people are going to see it. But then the reality kind of kicked in of, you know, I've been on Instagram, I've been on Facebook, we have this, we've never necessarily gone viral. Sure, hundreds of people have seen it, but you're like, I guess it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah. And I think like another thing, you probably have this conversation with your client too. Like if you're on there with an intent, like either it's a business or like a personal message, then you're normally safe in that. Like you're not going on there and like doing anything malicious or stupid or like anything like that. So it's kind of like, if I stay true to myself, that's how I view it now. Like if I'm, you know, who I am, it shouldn't end badly. Like there's still that anxiety of like, what if, blah, blah, blah. But as long as you're, you know, not acting outside of your norm and you're posting it, you're normally editing it too. I think that's a great point. Like a lot of things that are produced and put on social media now go through an editing process. You can fix things too. Like if you like, I don't know, sneeze in the middle of your video, you can go take that out. Like it's not going to be like a permanent embarrassing thing. And that's kind of once you realize that, I'm sure your clients go, oh, okay, I can fix it and like I can reshoot it. It's not that bad.
Yeah, that's definitely the first thing. It's like, you know, we can do it as many times as you want. If you hate the way you say that, we can just do it again. You know, we can workshop it until you feel good about it. But the funny thing is, like, because most of the people that I work with are business owners and they love their business. And it's like, you know, you guys are here because you love doing the podcast. And it's normally when we're doing video, it's normally about something that we really love to do. We're talking about something that we're passionate about. It's really like, oh, okay, I'm forced to get on this video and talk about this thing I don't really like, because that's when the energy is just going to be awful and you're going to hate it because you're going to hate looking at yourself talking about something that you hate. So when you're actually there talking about something that you love, it normally just comes across way better than, you know, I think you think it's going to. And of course, it's not going to be, you know, probably amazing the first time because video is all about practice. But, you know, you are there usually because you want to be, like, you want to get this message out there. So I think at the end of the experience, they go, oh, they're, you know, so like stressed and stiff. And, you know, at the end of it, they go, oh, well, that wasn't that bad. And, you know, they feel like it's like, yeah, like this is something that I'm passionate about, getting the message out there. And it's normally, it's normally a feeling of relief as well, but it's like, okay, cool. Like I'm doing this. And yeah, I guess, you know, when you guys put the podcast out as well, you know, you get that feeling of, it's like, hey, like, you know, we're sharing this with like all these people who can resonate. And so it's like daunting, but a good feeling as well.
Yeah. And I think we always, of course, because of our topic, relate it back to fearing that it's going to fail. either like in the success metric, or like it's just like Sam said, an embarrassing viral like video. But we eventually, that hitting that publish button or scheduling that post wasn't, an anxiety attack after the first few times. It was more of like, okay, we have a routine. I feel comfortable with this. Like, we went over this episode like a few times. And then even in the editing, like you stop editing so much too. Like, what you can leave in, what really matters and whatnot. But do you ever have to have those conversations with your client of like, hey, let's talk about why you're so scared of this, or like, what is the worst that could happen? That kind of catastrophizing thing.
Yeah, I've had a couple of clients, and it's normally about when we are talking about like their topic is a deeper topic and they don't want it to come across wrong, or like they have this idea in their head of like how they want to say it but can't quite articulate it yet. And, I have had a couple of instances like where literally we press record and okay, we'll just do a practice kind of warm-up question, and it suddenly kind of hit them, and it's been like, even like a really emotional like kind of freeze up. Just okay, just cut the camera, like let's let's talk about this. And it's it's always coming from a place of like they just want it to come across to their audience, right? And they just want to get to the right people. And then we can workshop like, okay, well, what's the words we want to use, and we can do all that like without even recording. And sometimes we even do like sit there and we'll do like an interview thing where it's just them on the camera, but I'm behind the camera asking them interview questions so that it can kind of prompt different answers out of them, and then we just record until feel comfortable with it. But yeah, it's it's different with every person, I find, and I think it's
ready, go, action. So we end up in these situations where we can go a little bit deeper, right? Because we create this connection with other human beings. We are trying to help them. But then if it goes past the, hey, I'm trying to show you something in terms of like a skill set of like videography, personal training, whatever it is, and it gets to a place where, hey, I'm afraid of this, and you're able to help them navigate into an understanding of, okay, well, let's be mindful of it a different way, instead of just reacting to like, hey, I'm scared and I'm freezing up, of take a couple of deep breaths, let's think about why you're afraid, and then you kind of take control of the fear. And what's really interesting to me is I'm sure there were people that did that in my life when I was younger, and maybe I just wasn't aware of it. But now as I think about that and I try to help people in whatever skill set that I'm trying to help them in, I see those opportunities more often, right? And it can be a beautiful thing. It can also not be received well at all, right? And maybe you've had that happen before, where you're like, hey, Sam, like, let's think about, why are you so afraid to be on the camera? Like, are you afraid of going viral? Are you whatever? And then, I get defensive and it's like, I don't even want to do this at all. And you're like, okay, well, that's not what we were trying to do here, right?
Backfired.
I mean, have you ever had situations where like the client was like, hey, look, like this is too much, I can't do it?
It hasn't quite been quite that just don't like, can't do it at all. It's been like, they, especially when it might come to like a personal story, it's like something that they want to do, but when we get to the day, it's like, oh, maybe not, kind of thing. So it might be we record other videos instead. Like, it's always going to end up, it's like, cool, we'll get on camera and we'll talk, but we'll make it less personal. It might be more like about the business, informational stuff, when they might decide we'll do the personal story next time, and so they can spend more time like working themselves up to do that. So it might be literally we've planned for a whole day of filming, but it is taxing to get on camera and talk, but when you, I guess, you separate that from being the super personal, it's okay, how can we still maybe tell the story? And this is more for them to start to just get used to being on camera and talking. Like, how can we start to do this, but take away that, like, that real anxiety about it? It's like, let's take a step back and just make it more about the business, And, you know, sometimes we will come back and like, you know, a few weeks later and we'll film a personal story, but then it's like there by itself. It's not like we've got 10,000 things to do. It's okay, we've prepped for this now, either, you know, written notes or this is what we want to say and not want to say, and just, you know, kind of take the pressure off. And it's just more about us kind of having a conversation. It's like me and them in the room, just talking, kind of like exactly like this situation now, but then we're getting it on video and then we work through the edit and how much we want to leave in and leave out. So
movie magic.
yeah, just taking a step back. Exactly.
I think that that's an awesome like method too. You don't always have to do the big giant thing first. Like a lot of people get stuck because they're like, I gotta do the whole thing at once. And breaking it down for them like that in any area in life, just going, let's do this little bit, because you're you know, struggling with the bigger bit. We'll knock that out. You're still going to feel like you've got something accomplished, and then either move it out or however you want to do it. And then we'll do it just on that. And then even adding like the extra layer of like less pressure, like it's not a scripted or from the heart like kind of video. It's more of like, I'm going to talk to you and we'll, you know, pick out the good stuff from that. And I think in general that probably just takes a weight off of people's shoulders who aren't, you know, quite to the comfortable part yet.
I think we've all been in some kind of situation or scenario where looking back at it, like looking back at whatever the situation was, you can go like, I guess it really wasn't that big of a deal. But you still have the memory of being in this situation going like, this is insane. And I know this is an extreme example, but like the first time I ever went skydiving, I was all about it. Like I really wanted to do it. A bunch of my buddies, like we all got together, signed up. You're on the plane, you're going up. And even then you get a little nervous, but you're like, man, I'm doing this. Like I'm excited. And as soon as that door opens and you're like looking out of the plane, you know, now it's like, this is insane. Like, what am I doing? And then, I mean, I'll never forget the first time I was, you know, it was tandem, but I'm falling after jumping out of the plane. And, you know, my brain couldn't help but go like, I'm going to die. Like you just jumped out of a plane. Like you're an idiot. What have you done? And looking back, you know, yes, it's a wild adrenaline rush. And yes, I jumped out of a plane, but that was something that, you know, the instructor that was strapped to my back, he had done it thousands of times. Like for him, he was just like, all right, here we go. I'm going to fly for a little bit. And looking back, I can say like, it really wasn't that big of a deal. It's just jumping out of a plane, you know? You have anything that's kind of like that where you look back at it and you go, I guess it wasn't as crazy as it felt?
Nothing as crazy as jumping out of a plane, but that's definitely on
you started it like way up there.
Set the bar really high. Honestly, for me it was literally like starting my podcast, because in the back of my head I think, oh, like a podcast is something that I've always wanted to do. I didn't know what I wanted to be about, but I always thought, oh, like that's not for someone like me. Like, you know, only extroverts can have podcasts. Wherever that kind of thought came from, I don't really know. But and then for ages I like didn't do it, and then COVID happened, and I was kind of like, oh well, I mean, I'm at home for 3 months, like, you know, now or never kind of thing. But when I went to actually do it, like I lined up some guests, and these are people that I'd known forever. Like it was not like it was just meeting a random stranger and, you know, asking about their life story. But in the morning I'm doing it, I'm sitting there like literally shaking, and I'm like, I can't get on this call. Like I'm gonna have to cancel it. Like what was I thinking? Like I've no idea what I'm doing. And it blew up to be this massive thing. And I was like, no, just don't cancel it. Just get on, because if you don't do it today, you're going to make an excuse forever. And then I got on and, you know, literally like trying to stop my fingers from shaking. And then it went great. And it was, you know, again, it's like work in progress. If I listen to that episode now, I'd probably be a bit, oh, you know, that wasn't my best work. But it's like, you know, what was the big deal that I was so worried about? And now it's like every week, you know, just jumping on, having a chat. And, you know, like you're saying earlier, you edit less. I think, you know, now I used to, in the beginning, I'd edit so meticulously and take out like every breath and every and every little tiny thing that might be wrong. And like, oh, I don't know if I like how my voice sounds there. And now it's like, oh yeah, taking things out if anything went completely haywire. cut it out and then post it. And it's like the pressure is just not there anymore. It's something that's actually fun and enjoyable now, which is what it was meant to be in the start. But yeah, it worked it up so much in my head, and it was,
yeah,
it went great. So
it's basically that's basically jumping out of a plane in my book. Like it's a very scary thing where you have to just go. I mean, there have been times where I'm having one of those days where I'm a little anxious of like, hey, we're about to like interview a person and we're about to jump on a podcast. And after we did it a few times, like Megan pointed out, she's like, it's okay to be nervous. It's okay to have a little anxiety, but she's like, think about it. Every time you start, you just flip the switch and you just do it. And then all of a sudden the episode's over and you're just sitting there like, okay, well, I guess we did it. Which by the way, I don't think you said, what's the name of your podcast?
Oh, my podcast is called the Mindset Mastery Podcast. So
Nice.
It's all about pretty broad around mindset and neuroscience. And because it's kind of sideline, but a little bit goes hand in hand with the business, because as much as I work with people with video, it is all about the confidence stuff. And, like a lot of the mindset stuff really works with that. So yeah, I think it's really cool to get to talk to people, whether they're like experts in the field or just everyday people who have had different experiences, all around mindset. So
Nice.
Yeah.
I really enjoy. So Audible is a great thing because I'd rather listen to a book than read a book, but it's allowed me to open like a whole doorway of books that I wouldn't be able to like keep my attention while reading, but I'm able to like drive and listen to a book. And some of the books that are out there that just talk about how our brains work and why they're doing what they're doing. If you listen to it and you're able to absorb it, it really will change how you interact with your day-to-day reality. And things like developing confidence can come from that. I find it really interesting too, where getting into, let's say, a podcast and talking to let's say strangers, right? Guests, you get so many different perspectives that you don't really have a choice. It starts to change you, and you start to pick these little things from people, and it changes your life, when you start a podcast, you don't think about that. You think about,
you're
oh
like,
my God,
this is gonna be scary and cool. But then like we're not even to our year mark, but just the people we've been able to talk to, and your topic's kind of similar, and you can kind of go in any direction. You can stick to somewhat experts in your field, but the mindset affects pretty much everyone. Like everyone has a mindset that gives their kind of perspective of what's going on in their life. And the same with failure. Pretty much everyone's going to deal with that. Yeah. And that makes it even more exciting and fun. But to go back to the introvert part of starting a podcast, I am so like introverted and shy normally with people, and Sam's like the outgoing guy. So my thought was like he could, and he does handle a lot of that energy of turning that on. But I was so scared at the beginning, just being able to like be open with people and talk to people. And like we started with friends, like similar to your story too. And even that, I was like, God, I either know too much or like I don't know what to bring up because I already know them so well. I'm like overthinking. And I think for some people it goes hand in hand, being an introvert and kind of that overthinking methodology.
Sure.
And it makes you kind of spin and spiral. But yeah, I guess the theme of the episode is ripping the Bandaid off and just diving in. Skydiver.
Absolutely.
I do think it's funny because I've had people that have known me for a really long time, and I am extroverted for sure, and I do have a very high energy. I'm a very goofy type person, but then a lot of people, you kind of show them a little bit of, like I was freaking out because I'm about to record this podcast, and like I don't know what's going to happen, and they're like, dude, you're going to do great. But in my head, there's all this turbulence of what have I like decided to do here? Like what are the implications of starting a podcast? But after you start doing it for a while, I look back at things now, and there was a couple of years of my life where I was just stressed all the time. I was overthinking all of it, everything. And the podcast is one thing that's been helpful. There's several other things that I've been doing where you practice going with the flow and trusting the flow of life. I mean, things are just going to be happening, right? And I'm not saying things don't get rocky and scary, but you also have to be allowed to let the really cool stuff happen too. You know what I mean? And I won't say that takes the fear away completely, but it definitely makes it way more manageable, right? Because all of a sudden you're like, I've fallen down a bunch of times and I got up. Like I might have been limping a little bit, right? Like I broke my leg, but it healed. It's fine, right?
Yeah. And if I just like build on that with, talking about what the podcast kind of gives you, apart from, you get to talk to great people and then you get people listening, but it's like the stuff that it gives you for your personal development as well, just like you're saying, like with everyday life. It's something that you literally don't think about it when you get on there and do it. But, and I say, I can't do a podcast, I'm very introverted, but, really, like, I'm not super introverted. It's just, thinking of like, oh, I'm going to put myself up there with all these really confident people and like reaching out to strangers that are like, up here. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm just like, this little girl from Brisbane who, has this little business type thing. But the shift that it has given me in my mindset, not just because we talk about mindset on the podcast, but reaching out to these people and making relationships with them. And I suppose putting myself up on their level, like they're a peer. They're not like, someone who's necessarily super high up. They might be an everyday person just like me, but they have experience in this area that we're talking about for this show. And especially when I jumped on a podcast as a guest for the first time, another kind of, oh my goodness, what am I doing type of moment. But I thought, hang on a second, like I've been here before. I've been in this absolutely terrified situation before, starting the podcast and getting on YouTube and getting my first client and getting my first job and going to university and like going, well, I've done all those things. So like, is this really actually such a big deal? It's kind of just let go and just enjoy the experience more. So that real, self-development work that putting yourself out of your comfort zone does, it absolutely changes you. And now it's almost like, okay, what's the next thing that I can do to get out of my comfort zone again? Because it stretches the bubble. It every
empowers
time.
you. So you're like, well, if I did that, then I could probably do this too. And it's kind of in the lines of imposter syndrome, because I've definitely felt it too, where like booking a guest and you're like, oh, I do not qualify to talk to this person. And it's ridiculous because like we're all people, and then you have to remind yourself of that, like they are talking back to me. It's not like I'm like, begging them to be on this podcast. Like they want to do this, I want them to do this. So it's a mutual thing. We are equals in that, at least. And it doesn't matter, like you said, like you just kind of get past it and you go, I can do this. Even though my skills aren't their skills, I've been through this, and this, and it has prepared me for this opportunity. And it is hard to be like, I'm ready for this, because I think a lot of people like in our age range and even younger, you still are like, I'm not an adult yet. Like I'm not ready for like this type of responsibility, just because it feels so, scary at times. But then you go, oh wait, I am. I've been doing it for a while.
So you both kind of bring up a good point. The first thing I want to say is I love how like you said, just let go. Sometimes you have to do that. Like I'll get all worked up and I'm like, just let go. And it's weird because it has this like washing over you effect of, all right, fine, I will let go. And even though you have to fight yourself a little bit, you just kind of let it dissipate a little bit. I look back, so I started a new, I guess, journey in terms of like, I guess the career side of things, where I'm having to develop a skill that I already kind of worked on, but in a different format, right? A different industry. And one thing that was interesting is all of a sudden, all these things were clicking in my head, where I used to look at it very negatively of like, I did military a long time ago. I did 4 years, I got out. And then it was like, oh, well, I feel obligated to go to school. But like, I never was really about it. I didn't really know why I would want to go to school for whatever career, right? So then I jumped around like all these different corporations, this, that, and the other. I jumped into entrepreneurial situations. And over time, and I wasn't really aware of it, what I was trying to do is just throw yourself into it. Like, at least give yourself the opportunity, right? Throw yourself into it. And then I'd be like surrounded by fire and be like, oh man, this isn't how it was supposed to be. But every single time I learned something, right? Like, you hear people talk about, you know, like, let's say being married, and they'll be like, but all the relationships before that led me to a point where I was ready to be married and ready to be in that version of a relationship, right? It's the same thing with like career situations, or, you know, entrepreneurial opportunities, where maybe you weren't ready for it, but you threw yourself into it anyway, and you learned from it. And so now I'm in this situation where I still hear that little voice in the back of my head that's like, oh man, like, what have you done? What are you doing? You know, that voice that's always kind of there, that's like, you can't do this, right? Like, just don't waste your time.
Doubt, yeah.
But then you're like, no, like, it's kind of a choice. I don't care how uncomfortable I feel. And all of that to be said of, I resonated with what you said of this time around, throwing myself into this opportunity. I was kind of excited about knowing for a fact I'm going to be really uncomfortable in some situations, and it's going to force me to grow as a person, because I have no choice but to learn and adapt if I want to get better. And where now I see the value of failure for what it's really worth, right? Failure isn't, you know, you make an ass out of yourself, it gets recorded at Walmart and posted on the internet and it goes viral, even though a lot of us would agree that's a fail. But you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, like, failure is really the learning mechanism, so that you can figure it out the way you need to figure it out, so you can proceed forward. And I love that, right?
I think that kind of leads me to a question. Have you had a moment where you felt like, oh my gosh, I'm failing at everything? What do I do? Do I have to jump into this next scary thing? Have you gone through something around that?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And then, you know, looking back on it now, I'm thinking like, what was the big deal? It's like everything. But at this moment, it was just like, oh my gosh, my world has come crashing down. Like, and everything felt bad because it was really just this one thing. So, you know, I'll give you like a little bit of a backstory so that, you know, this incident makes sense. But when I was going through school, university, it was very typical, like focused on grades, like anything less than an A- is a fail. Like I was very intense at school, I'd say, because I'm like, oh, I think you want to get perfect grades, I get into a great university and get a great job. And, you know, it was always just really thinking about the future and thinking about, you know, I didn't really necessarily have even a goal in mind. It was like, whatever it is, I need to achieve at it to feel self-worth. And it was, you know, really intense. So when I left uni, I had my first actual job in the industry. And the reality of the situation was that job it wasn't for me. But, you know, I probably spent almost a year there. And then I got to a point, I was like, I just don't want to be here anymore. And so I quit, just kind of a little bit out of the blue. I just found myself resigning one day. And then I went home and I'm sitting on the floor of my bedroom, just being like, what have I done? Like, how am I going to tell my friends and family that I couldn't do it? Like, you know, all my other friends that have left uni, they're all in their jobs and they're thriving. Maybe they weren't. Like, I will never know. You know, on the outside, it's like maybe they're sitting in the same position as I am. But it was this real kind of like identity shattering moment where I was like, I couldn't do this. Like, am I not cut out to be in the real world type thing? Thinking it's like, oh, okay, well, I breezed through school and university on all these good grades, but what does that even mean if I can't like hack it in this first actual industry job? And so, you know, carried out the rest of my notice from that job, just kind of a bit of a, well, I have no plan, but I'm just gonna have to figure something out. And it shook me for a while. I was like thinking, you know, like, what am I meant to do? But you know, I just decided that, you know, where I was living at the time, because I'd moved out of home and I loved where I lived and I loved my housemates and the new lifestyles. Like, I have to make this work. Like, I have to just find something and, you know, pay the bills type thing. And so from there, it's like this absolute, like, you know, what felt like the biggest failure of my life. It's like, well, that's literally led me to what I'm doing now, because that's where I kicked off the business kind of thing. And it was a progress of working for a few different people and then just, learning different things that I could. And after I got out of that job, it was like, well, that just wasn't for me. And I'm like, look at all these things that I can do now and that I am doing because that just fits better with me. So yeah, it felt like a really crazy time. And I look back and going, that was the best decision I ever made, was to leave that job. So.
It's wild because that resonates with like my story to its core. Like Sam knows I had like in my industry almost the same experience, like got out of school, got recruited by this great company, and I was like, oh, I'm successful, like I'm doing the thing. I hated it. I absolutely hated it. I will not name names, but it was awful. Like it was not a good time. And it was mainly like it just wasn't a good balance for me. Like sometimes it's just one part of the job that will push you over the edge, and the work-life balance killed me. So by the end of that year, I was in the same boat as you, and I was like, I need to get out, but I have bills to pay, and I don't want to be like, hey, family, like I couldn't do it. I couldn't do the thing that I went to school for. And then I had to kind of do what you did and make a jump and be like, I guess I'm going to go try this over here. And it was the best decision like I could have made. I definitely was skeptical, like you were at first, like, can I do this? But then once you get into the next thing, you're like, this is way better. Like, why did I even doubt this? I feel human again.
Yeah.
So it leads me to a couple of things. We've all heard the phrase of hitting rock bottom. All of a sudden, you're like, it can't get any worse. What do I want? Right? You're like, if it can't get any worse than this, I have nothing to be afraid of. What do I want? And just go for it. Right. And I think if you reflect on that, you eventually figure out that, rock bottom doesn't have to be like you're in the worst case scenario that you can imagine of like, hey, I've lost everything, I'm living under a bridge or whatever it is, right? But you touched on something that I recently identified, and it happens to everyone, I think, but where you have this identity crisis, like your identity gets shattered because you get so uncomfortable that it pushes you to a point where you go, something's got to give, I'm going to do something about it, even if it makes no sense. One thing that Megan and I kind of talked about was, what was the American dream? And what was it for our parents, our grandparents? What is it now for us? And one thing that, from my experience was I had issues where I didn't know how to cope with the fact that I was realizing slowly but surely that dream that I had been told about and like my parents had been told about did not exist anymore. It wasn't even a choice, even if I wanted it. With that being said, is there something like that you've had to deal with where, they painted the picture of like, you go to uni and then you go get that job, right? Was that like the dream that they sold? And then one day you were like, hey, that's not for me. Because that's what I did. I think a lot of us end up at a point at some point of the journey of self-development, you go, this isn't for me, and it's okay that it's not for me.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it sounds like you kind of went through that, but so I guess back to the question of which, was there like a dream that was sold to you while you were growing up?
Yeah, I mean, kind of yes and no. I always had an idea in the back of my head that I wanted to have my own business. But I was like, well, I can't just leave uni, have a business. It's got to be like, you got to work your way up kind of thing. And while I was at uni, I'd kind of been exposed to like working in TV and working at this and all these different opportunities. And so my plan, like when I left uni, like, I'm going to get this job and then I'm going to get like another job in the industry. I'm just going to gain like all this experience and work for all these great companies like in television. And I suppose, it's like I had kind of this two different things on mind. It's like one day out there somewhere in the future, I want to like have this business, but like for the short term, I was like, I want to work in television and I want to, like broadcast television, like work on the Olympic Games and work on all these, massive events.
Nice.
But I suppose when I got there and I was working in television and I was like, I don't know. It's like, it's not like as good as I thought it would be. It's like, and then I was, when I left this job and I kind of left this direction that I had by like, oh, okay, well, I'm not working in TV anymore. So I was like thinking about it and I was like, well, it's actually just a lot of long days, getting sunburnt and dehydrated.
Oh,
when
gosh.
I could be doing something that I want to do. Like I could be doing video in a much more like in a much better capacity kind of thing. So it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, I suppose I stepped back and looked at, well, what was actually my plan? Yeah, I don't want that anymore. And that was kind of the, yeah, that kind of realization. And then, yeah, it was literally just, okay, well, what am I going to do? And started actually looking for other opportunities from that when I was like, yeah, well, this isn't the path that I want to follow anymore. So what's it going to be? And
Mm.
looking outside of that. And eventually, you know, it did lead me probably way earlier than I thought it would into working in the business. So I think it's funny how, you know, that wasn't even my intention when I quit my job, but it's always something that I've gravitated towards. And I think the steps that I took after that, it was like this thing in the back of my mind, and it just slowly just went there naturally after that.
And it like worked its way. Yeah. And I think it's cool because like maybe cool is not the word, but like it's a common like thing for young people that they go through, like I need to do maybe like this path because it's the most popular path that I see other people do, or it's how you get successful, or like I know I can start here, and then like it's all a similar version of that. But I think a lot of like people coming out of that, they get into the same position we've all been in at some point or another, where you go, ooh, I don't like this. Like, this is not what I thought I signed up for. And then, yeah, you kind of have to spin. But I think ultimately, for the most part, it's always going to end in a better place because it made you face that ugly truth. And at least it was early. Like, if you want to look at it as a silver lining, and then you get to go, all right, got to pivot. Like, I have no choice. And you get to start on your dream a little bit earlier, or you get to, for some people at least, just start figuring out what you want to define as your dream. Yeah.
It's wild to me
Yeah.
because, you know, I haven't like stayed with a company for 20 years and retired, right? But there's this weird thing of you get into it, and if you're growing as an individual, it's insane to think that you're not going to change as a person, right? Like your identity will change, your beliefs will change, where you live, who's in your life, right? Like your friend circle. And I'm sure there are plenty of people out there that they get to a certain point and they just maintain it because they're like, this is it, I'm good. But I eventually had to ask myself that question of like, what am I going to do if I'm not a person that can just pick a company and work for them for 20 years, right? And so individuals end up in places where it's like, okay, I have this skill set and like videography, how can I help people with it? And then, you know what I mean? Like you just kind of created your own.
Yeah.
You created your own, like
And
you
that's
made
the
your
cool
own
thing
space.
is that is an option that people forget a lot of the times because they limit themselves back to that imposter syndrome of like, I can't do this. I can't like make my own business. But I'm sure you went through like little steps and you like figured things out. It didn't like flip on overnight and you instantly had a business running. But
she's like, nope, that's how it works.
She's
I
like,
just flipped the
actually,
Yeah,
switch.
that's it. Yep.
It was that easy.
Just turned it on. I pushed a button.
Yeah, I'd love to be able to say. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, but I mean, definitely. Yeah. And, you know, even after like leaving that job and then, you know, pursuing different things, and yes, like it was lots of little steps. But you know, got to remember, like, you're always going to also learn something from that uncomfortable experience. So don't, you know, just kind of like, oh, forget about that. It's in the past now. Like, I never want to think about that again. It's like, yeah, I really learned some valuable things in that experience. But then after that, it was like, okay, so instead of like kind of going, oh, well, what's next? Let's like kind of jump into another job. I was like, okay, what do I need to gain to get to like where I want to go? I'm like, well, I need to gain experience in my field now, because like I've been through uni, but you know, that only takes you so far, and I've been through this one area of my industry. So it's like, okay, well, I need to branch out. And I was just looking for opportunities to gain experience all the time. So yeah, and that's really what kind of led to the business. It's like, well, what do I need to learn to get there? And so I went and worked for other production companies as like a starting point. I just, you know, and I think the other good thing about going through that quitting the job experience, because I have a lot of like other friends like, oh my God, like, I could never do that. Like that's too kind of scary. But I think it took a lot of fear away for me. It was like, oh, well, I'm just going to send out like 20 emails today to all these different production companies and see if anyone writes me back. And just like, oh, like I could never like cold reach out to someone. And it's like, well, what is the worst that's going to happen?
Right.
Like the worst thing that could happen is either they just don't reply to me, which a lot of them didn't, or they say no, which a lot of them didn't. And then a couple of them said yes. And it's like, okay, well, that just, that started the next chapter of my life. And if I just sat there feeling sorry for myself, going, oh, like this experience is so bad, and just really dwelled on that, I wouldn't have been able to create anything from that. I wouldn't have been able to move forward, So it's really just, it definitely took a lot of the fear away and really made me question, well, what, like literally, what's the worst thing that could happen? I already quit my job. So it's only up from here, right?
I already jumped out of the plane. So.
Exactly. If you've already jumped, why? And the cold call thing, I think, is like a great point that people get very like uncomfortable with that. And even me, like maybe let's say 2 years ago, thinking about like a cold email to someone I don't know, asking them to be a guest, I'd be like, not gonna do that. It's really uncomfy. They probably won't like it, whatever. But now I do it all the time, and we get guests sometimes that way. And it like you said, the worst that's going to happen is they either don't read it or don't respond, which is fine. It does no damage.
I will say, from somebody pointed it out to me one time, it was a while back. I think it was something to do with like trying to reach out to people to be like, hey, I have this skill set. Let me teach you how to work out if you need it, or like whatever. And I was like, man, like I can't get over XYZ. And it was like, think about all the times that you've gotten like a cold reach out, email or text message or phone call yourself. How did you react? And of course, I was sitting there and I was like, well, that's what I'm afraid of, is like, I'm like, don't ever call me again, or like you ignore it or whatever. But then it kind of makes you think about it, and you're like, it wasn't a negative thing, right? Like you usually just, I don't care about this, and you just ignore it. And so it was like, that's probably what they're going to do to you. But there is going to be someone that's going to go, hey, wait a minute. No, like I need whatever you're talking about. Like, can you help me out? And then the conversation starts. So it's really weird, right? Because if you just flip the role, it's like, what was the worst thing you did to anybody that cold reached out to you? And you're like, it's not like I hunted them down and was like, how dare you, right? So I think that's a good point, right? And then the only way to start to put pieces together in the way that we're talking about is you have to go get experience, and part of that experience is going to be easy peasy, and some of it is going to be a crucible that is going to be
not going to be fun, but you gotta just rip it off. And
there's so many things out there that are getting thrown at us where catchphrases and motivation and whatever, and it's like, if it resonates with you and works for you, great, but you don't have to apply every little thing that people are like force feeding us, right? Like you have to figure out a way to take the time to go, who am I? Who do I want to be? What do I want to be doing here? And then create a plan, right? And then just leave it open of like, if the plan changes, the plan changes. That was one of my biggest issues, is I was like, I need to pick a plan, and no matter what, I stick to it. And it was like, why would you limit yourself like that, right? So hopefully this isn't like a super dramatic segue, but I did want to make sure that I was able to give you like the opportunity. I love to kind of give our guests the situation of, hey, do you have any like advice that you think people need to hear that helped you, or that you came up with after dealing with your life experience? Does anything come to mind?
I think something that is really relatable to what we've been talking about, it's something that stuck with me from when I was back in university, like talking about putting yourself out there. It's the idea that fear and excitement is actually the same chemical reaction in your brain. It's the exact same thing, and you get to choose if you're afraid or if you're excited. And so I'm going for my first job interview, and I'm like sitting there again in the hallway, like physically shaking, just like I was with the podcast. I'm like, okay, like I'm terrified, but like I really want this opportunity, and this would be really exciting. So it's like I can choose if it's going to be fear or excitement. And excitement is a lot more energizing and a lot more positive, and it lets you get control of your faculties a lot more than fear. And, you know, when I tell that to people as well, I tell that to clients or whoever it is that, you know, I'm working with, and, you know, whether it's actually true or not, if the person that was telling that to me, if that is even a fact, I've never even looked it up, to be honest. But the idea, if you believe that, if you can choose whether you're afraid or you're excited, then you're going to be able to get control of that in the moment and be able to do something good with it, rather than like really focusing on the fear and then having, you know, more chance that those negative things that you're thinking about are going to happen.
I think I needed to hear that.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. Like, that is a great like way to just wrap it up in a nice little like, all that scary stuff you can choose. And I think
you can choose.
Yeah, even if it is just a mindset thing, like you kind of said at the end, it's still powerful because you can just make that switch of like, oh, I'm excited about this. It's scary, but I'm excited. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I feel like you should make a shirt for your podcast, and it should say, you get to choose, right? Are you scared or are you excited?
Yeah.
But I also love how you're like,
great.
I love how you're like, you know, I never went and like verified it, but you're like, it worked enough for me that I just kept it, right? And like, I don't
That's
care if
enough.
it's I don't care if it's accurate or not. Like, it flipped a switch in my brain as you were saying it, of just decide, do you want to be scared or do you want to try to be excited? Either way, it's a high energy experience, you know. It's more about, am I going to be positive or negative? I love that. That's awesome. Definitely think that you know, we'll get to like really deep dive into your podcast, and then, you know, you can like later you'll just be sitting there going, I wonder what they think about it, right? No. You're like, I'm going to choose to be excited and not scared, right? You know, this is Megan's favorite time, where we talk to those listeners about that fancy smancy social media,
that high-tech social media that everyone
that high tech. Yeah, I like that.
Well, you can find us on all socials at Friends of Failure, and then you can also find our lovely guest at That Camera Girl, right, on Instagram. And she's got a lot of good content, and it'll link you up to all her other good stuff. And then don't forget Mindset Mastery. And you're on everything too, right? So any podcast platform, you can find that.
Yeah.
Yay. And then the fun part for us, we keep saying that we like to give out our email to everyone, so you can send your own failure stories. It can be short and sweet, it can be your whole life story, it can be anonymous, or put your whole name to it, put a fake name, we do not care. But you can send that into friendsoffailurepodcast@gmail.com, and that's it.
We figure out that one person's just changing the name every time, right? Like, they just keep making a new email, and then one day we find out it was like our number one fan, and they were just like, yeah, I just figured it'd be everybody.
It's like one of our parents.
Oh yeah, it's like, yeah. That would actually be a whole podcast episode of like, okay, everyone, like, originally we were going to have a guest, but now we have to tell you about, you know, this story that has been unfolding, right?
It's my dad, just different.
Hey, like, it's probably going to be someone that like retired, and they're like, well, I gotta do something. But I do want to thank everyone for listening and joining us today. And of course, I want to leave you with our final thought, which is always going to be, life is happening for you, not to you. So go do something.
If it's not I'm stronger than you, it's I'm wiser than you, I'm more loving than you, I'm more tolerant than you, I'm more sophisticated than you. It doesn't matter what it is, but this constant competition is going on. This is the secret. This is the secret. You can't make a mistake.